Hi guys, my name's Chelsea Pauga. I work as an energy market analyst. So my company's name is AEP Energy. So you can see like their logo up there. Interesting fact, they're actually getting sold. That's like a new thing, new development as of this week. So I don't know if I'll be sticking around with AEP Energy forever, but that's where I'm at for now, and that will be like a whole fun process for me. Um, but my background is this is my like resume spiel. I'm not going to read off of this because honestly, it is very much the high level spiel of like who I am, what I want to do, what I do at my job. Um, but basically, my background is largely in environmental studies. I actually did work in a different industry before this. I was working as an environmental consultant. So I was working in the real estate industry, which is very different than what I do now. Now I work in the energy space and I love it. I really was looking for a career change. So if you're interested in the thought that, oh my gosh, it's so scary to have a career change, I'm going to commit to something right after I graduate, and is this the end all be all? I guarantee it's not. You can definitely make a change, and I did. And so what I do now is largely I work in decarbonization. So a lot of these companies, I'm sure you guys hear all the time, ESG goals, we have sustainability goals, like carbon, net zero, what does all that mean? Like a lot of companies have these things now for a bunch of different reasons. And I kind of like to phrase myself like I'm an energy consultant. So people hire me to be like, here's our goal, what do we do, how do we get there? And I do a lot more than that. I will say I do a lot more than that. But decarbonization for me is like the thing that I find the most interesting, like the most compelling, right? Like I'm pretty environmentally driven. I'm pretty passionate about it. I feel like there's a lot of an impact that I can have. So a lot of what I do with decarbonization is figure out, okay, what is the client's motivations? What are their limitations? And then finally, really, what are their goals? Like, end all be all, what are their goals? So for all these things, and again, you should feel free to stop me at any time if I'm not like explaining things. I'm just gonna like go through and then do like an informal Q&A. I'm not trying to be like just talking at you for a really long time. So in terms of motivations, this is a mixed bag. We have, I mean, you can imagine like any single company, like if you look them up, I guarantee almost any company, we have like banks, we have, like clean, like hydrogen companies that come to us. We have like, a recent one was like a milk company. Like just random, any company. If you go to their page, I guarantee you they're gonna have something if you look on their webpage of like sustainability goals. Even if their company themselves, they have nothing to do with sustainability. All of them make a product, sell a product, have an impact on our environment. They have sustainability goals. So what we do is we help them figure that out, figure out how to get there. Their motivations could be a mixed bag of things. It could be altruistic. And I say a mixed bag because I don't want to just be this like pessimistic person, like, they're just doing it because people told them to or because it saves them money. There really are like companies out there that have altruistic motives. They're like trying to like get ahead of the curve. They're trying to do the right thing. But I will also say it's usually that, plus now we're in an economic state where investing in clean energy, it has often a positive net present value, right? Like it's good. It's a good investment. It's a good investment for their future. It's a good investment for their clients. Same moving into atmosphere. Sometimes they're just a huge company, huge bank, whatever, and their investors can see the writing on the wall. And they're saying, hey, this is really important for us. This is really important for your portfolio. You guys need to do this. So they're going to do it. And then finally, kind of like the last, like, all right, full compliance from just the state where they're at. It could either be United States or the EU or, like Asia, Australia, like all these different places. They have either federal requirements or country requirements or just general requirements for their region, whatever it may be. I think that's kind of like the last like motivator is like the actual, okay, you need to do it because the laws are telling you to. Limitations. So what their limitations may be. I think the number one obvious one, money, right? Like how much can they invest? How much capital investment do they have to put towards this? Oftentimes the answer is not that much, or it's a ton, and they don't know what to do with it, right? So that's where we come in. That's like why they hire us, okay? How can we invest our money so that it is working the best for them? How can we push them towards certain things or against other things, so that they can either make money or invest wisely? Location. So often what we're dealing with is companies that are in the United States, but they have so many sites, you guys, like so many sites across all these different states. There's different regulations in every single state, every single state. We're currently dealing with a client who is an international firm, and so they have sites that are all across the United States, so that alone is a project. And then they also have sites that are in Asia, Australia, South America, Latin America, and all across Europe. So they have very many different things that we need to look at, and it's completely different what's available to them and what's not. Next, flexibility or lack thereof. Sometimes they're super flexible in what they're looking for. They're just like, here's what our portfolio is, have at it. Sometimes they're very stringent in how flexible they can be. I mean, it's so client dependent. Risk, tolerance, or aversion. A lot of these things that I'm going to talk about, they can be really risky or they can be not risky at all. And you know, it really depends on what the client's tolerance or aversion is. And then finally, what their goals are. So additionality, you guys may have heard this term before, but really what it means is that if a client is investing in something green energy related, something that's going to decarbonize their portfolio, would that investment incur an additional amount of green energy? If not, they could be purchasing something that's already on the market, right? And I'll get into like a little bit of what that's like, a little bit of what those mechanisms are. They could be purchasing something that already exists, right? There's already a solar farm that's developed. There's already a wind farm. Okay, like we're just going to invest in that and then just like wipe our hands of it and call it done. That is not additionality. Instead, they could be investing and saying, oh, here, you're a solar or wind developer. We're going to give you money to make that farm. Would that farm have existed without their investment? That's what additionality is. Sometimes that's kind of like a stringent goal. Like sometimes companies are really excited, and they really, really want to claim that additionality. Like this would not exist without our investment. And then sometimes other companies are not nearly as interested in that, right? Like they're looking for a low risk, something that already exists investment. Mechanisms, I'm going to get into it a lot more on the next slide. Diversity ties very much in with mechanisms. Again, next slide, I'm going to just throw like alphabet soup at you guys. We kind of like I say it's like a joke, but it's like not a joke. When I first started my job again, this was only in September. It's like acronym soup. It's alphabet soup. They're just throwing letters at you and hoping you know what they're talking about. Economic feasibility, I mean, this is University of Chicago. I'm sure you guys here are hammered with this all the time. Like, is it economically feasible? Is it going to provide a net present value that's positive? All that stuff. I mean, you guys are inundated with that all the time. Claims and ESG goals, those two things are tied together. So based on what these companies decide to do, what they decide to go with, they can only make certain claims, right? So you can say you're X% green, or you have X amount of emissions that were reduced. You can only make those claims legally if you've done a certain thing. So there's like a lot of legalese, there's a lot of frameworks in place that kind of just restrict what you can or cannot claim. And sometimes companies are really interested in saying, hey, we're 100% green. That actually might not mean as much as you think it does. Or they want to say, oh, we reduced our emissions by 50%. That means a lot more than saying we're 100% green. So again, it's totally client dependent, totally depends. Oh, go ahead.
What does 100% green mean?
Yes.
Green means like, it's not no hard definition of it as far as sustainability goes. So what does that even mean to be 100% green?
That is an awesome question. It can mean a million things. The main thing that my understanding is companies have invested enough to like here. So over a year, they have X amount of emissions. They've used this amount of energy. Companies can invest enough to say invest enough, and it doesn't have to be like a project that caused additionality. It doesn't have to be something that they installed on site. They could be buying things that exist in other states. They could be buying a bunch of credits, whatever they may be, in a bunch of different forms. They only have to get to a point where they've purchased enough of whatever X amount of mixing of credits to say that they've offset their emissions. That doesn't necessarily mean they changed a thing about their building, about their process. They could be doing the exact same thing that they were doing before, but they could have just purchased enough of something green bundled in another. And again, I'll get into all the mechanisms. It's like, again, word salad on the next slide. But they could have just purchased enough to just say, wipe their hands of it. Cool, we're good, done. We didn't change a thing. We just bought a bunch of stuff. That could be what 100% green means. Go ahead. Sorry.
I had a quick question from something you said earlier.
Mm-hmm.
When you mentioned that compliance is sort of like the one that you saw the least, even though you still saw it. And I wanted to know if that was, in your opinion, because like they're the state and federal laws just aren't strict enough, or rather that these other reasons tend to just be ahead of the curve that companies already meet them before they would really reach the point of needing to comply?
I think that's a really good question. And I think that's a really good question because it's a totally mixed bag. I mean, I think you guys are pretty well aware there's not, the Inflation Reduction Act just got passed like last year, right? So there's a bunch of stuff in there that relates to this. It's awesome. It's not nearly as robust as maybe a lot of people on like the green side would want it to be, right? But it's a start, and it took forever to get it passed. And there's already a bunch of existing policies that are like they're starting to, oh, maybe they're gonna expire, or tax credits aren't gonna exist for like a lot of these things. So I think by design the government moves slow. Like I think people are pretty well aware of that fact. And also, not only does the government move slow, even when they do implement things, we don't necessarily know what it means. So one of my first job at my new job was literally, here's the Inflation Reduction Act, find out what it means for our clients. And the answer was, I don't know. Pretty much unique, like across the board, it was like, I don't know. I would hope that things are going to be developed that are going to state, okay, you can get X amount of tax credits, blah, 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 because that's going to be like an impetus for people to do things. But at the same time, I think actually more of what it is now is that people are trying to stay out of the curve because investors are seeing the writing on the wall, like I said earlier, and companies are beholden to their investors. They're beholden to their stakeholders. They're beholden to their stock prices, right? And they want to do things that are low risk. And it's finally like turning into a world where investing in high carbon output, whatever, having high emissions is risky. It's risky now. It's risky in terms of an economic sense. Even if like without any of the, like strip everything else away, just like it costs money. It's gonna cost money, and it's gonna cost money for a long time. So, I wish I could say that compliance was like more of an impetus, because like you want them to be ahead of the curve, but that's just not how government works. In my experience, again, like I do want to like put like a caveat on all of this. This is like all like my opinion, my experience, but I do very much feel that the government's kind of like falling behind, right? Like they're trying to create more incentives for things that already exist. Does that answer your question? I feel like I kind of rambled for a bit.
Yeah.
Cool.
Just to follow up on your last answer, do you think RECs are a form of greenwashing? Because like the idea is that you're not really using the electricity, that clean electricity that you're buying through RECs. It's just like you can have like a wind farm in Texas even though you're based in, I don't know, Massachusetts. So a lot of people say that, oh, that's like greenwashing because you can't really claim that you're green then. So what do you think about that?
My thought is that it's literally one of the aspects that we consider when we're doing these evaluations. We have to think about this. What claims can a company make? Companies often want to be able to make claims that have backing because people are smart enough to call them out on things that are greenwashing. So we include, like, literally in our reports, in our investigations, hey, like, it's like the bottom of the barrel. Like, hey, technically you could do this. We strongly suggest you don't, because the claims you're making, people can kind of see through the BS. If you'll excuse my French, I didn't even say it, but still, people can see through it, right? People can see through greenwashing, and it totally is it's fake. Like, I don't know if you guys ever watch, like, Whose Line Is It Anyway, but I do kind of feel like a lot of my job is like all the numbers are made up and a lot of it doesn't matter. Not because it doesn't matter, but because people can make claims and people can say things and kind of like play this like kind of like shell game where they're not actually making as much of an impact as they say they are. But I think people have gotten sophisticated, like even the general public, like a lot of people that I talk to, or just like people who aren't even in this industry, ask me that question a lot. They ask it both in terms of RECs, but also like carbon offsets. Are they real? Is the number valuation actually real? Are you actually making an impact? And I think people are kind of catching on to that. So I think companies are starting to be really averse to doing that. Because they know people can see through it and will call them out on it. So my personal opinion is that it's been happening for a while, but people caught up. People caught on. And now they know, okay, we probably need to hire some experts who know the industry, so we can make these robust claims to say, okay, we paid this company X amount to say that we can, like, honestly, truly say that we're not greenwashing. Because I think you're right. It has been happening for a while. And my opinion is that it's not cool. It's like one of those things where it's like you're not adding anything of value. You're just making a claim that can't be backed up. And I think finally people are starting to catch on. Cool. Did you have another question? Sorry. Yeah.
I forgot what I wanted.
Oh, no worries. Okay. Should I keep going? Cool. Also, very much appreciate your questions. Like, totally interrupt me. I love that. So, I don't even know what I was talking about. Okay, so goals. Mechanisms and diversity. What I mean by diversity is diversity of the mechanisms that they choose to implement, right? So, this is kind of what I mean when possibilities, mechanisms is kind of like a crossover. This is the alphabet soup that I'm kind of talking about in terms of decarbonization. First and foremost, like the first thing, right out of the bat, easiest thing for these companies to do is energy efficiency. I don't mean easy in terms of it doesn't cost anything. I just mean the easiest way to lower your emissions is to lower your emissions. Like, just straight up use less energy, right? So you guys go to UChicago, there's a bunch of like LEED buildings, and the new buildings that they have here, like, they're certified, they're gonna be efficient, right? And that's a really good way initially to just, it's the low-hanging fruit. Like, just make your building more efficient, figure out what your parameters are. And energy efficiency, like, full disclosure, is the thing I actually know the least about, even though I technically like worked on it a little bit with UChicago, just a teensy tiny bit. The rest of this stuff, so renewable energy certificates, like you were saying, there's a market for those, right? So it's for every 1 megawatt hour of energy that's generated. All of these companies, they're just able to put on a market. Here's how many RECs we have for sale, and people can just buy them wherever they are in the country. You could be in Texas, and you could buy them, and they're in Vermont, and just be like, all right, cool, like, whatever, we did our job, right? So that's why people often associate RECs with greenwashing, is because you can just you can buy them anywhere. The market exists in the entire United States. There's international ones, so they exist everywhere, and anyone can buy them, and it's great, right? Like, ideally, that's a great thing. They're investing in green energy, technically, but that green energy was already in existence. So were you really doing anything by buying those RECs? Maybe, maybe not. Utility green tariffs and integrated retail products. These are just more like complicated structures that, like, a lot of utilities like to do to just, they just bundle a bunch of like this green energy. It's RECs are usually specific to a project, they're specific to a site, they're specific to a whatever. So you have like a specific REC from a specific plant that generated X amount of energy. UGTs and IRPs, they're just like a bundling of those things, and they're meant to be packaged, and they're more expensive, but they're a little bit more diversified, and they also put those in the market. Community solar, I think, is fairly easy to like remember, just because it's a community solar farm. It's like a solar farm. Usually they're facilitated through utilities. Sometimes they're facilitated through a third party, but it's like I'm subscribed to one of these like on my energy bill. I don't know, like I only recently started like actually paying attention to my electricity bill, which is kind of embarrassing to say since I work in energy. But I subscribe to one of these, so we like have like a certain amount of money that goes to them every month, but then we get a credit every month for the amount of energy that they generated. So that's kind of a cool thing. But I will say it's largely only accessible to like residential and like low modern income apartment buildings, right? Like people who can't afford to install solar on their home. It's usually not all that available to companies. So usually companies aren't that interested in it. Sometimes like they think they're interested in it, and then they see like the actual economics of it, and they're like, oh, never mind, like we don't qualify. Usually they're way too large to actually qualify for those things. Carbon offsets. So these are also relatively controversial just because it depends on the project. A lot of these projects, so carbon offsets, the way that they work is it's basically they're like given to different projects that are stating that they're offsetting carbon, right? So the most common example is reforestation areas, right? But so they can say, hey, we're preserving this area of forest. It is sequestering this amount of carbon per year. Give me this amount of carbon offsets that we can then sell on the market, right? And I will say there's like a little bit of like hem and hawing because it's like, okay, you saying you're preserving this amount of forest per year. Did that just like already exist? And then you're just like claiming it? Did it already exist and then you're saying you're keeping loggers away from it, but then the loggers like go somewhere else and then like deforest some other area? It's really wishy-washy. There's a lot of investment in the industry right now in trying to figure these out. Like honestly, like trying to have like a base framework and being able to like really claim what they're saying is true. What do you mean not fixing anything moving forward?
Like, if you're just you're reforesting an area, I mean, that's something we destroyed that area of forest, and it's not dealing, but that wasn't even associated with fossil fuels, which is one of the really big problems anyways. I mean, it's just it feels kind of like maybe it doesn't really make any progress, and it's not really going to restore the forest to what it was for a very long time.
Sure.
So
And
it just feels kind of static to me.
sure. And it also, like, so it's forestation, I think, is the easiest thing to pick on because it's like, it's not the only thing that exists out there. But I will say it's also just hard to know. Like, if you give credits to, like, trees take forever to grow, guys. Like, they take a long time to grow. And they're honestly, like, they're not sequestering carbon if they don't exist for long enough to be able to grow, right? So you could be given carbon credits 1 year, carbon offsets 1 year that again you're selling on the market, which is supposed to encourage you to keep that land, right? But okay, what if you cut it down the next year? Are those carbon offsets still worth the same amount that they were supposed to be worth last year? Like, this is where it gets really tricky. So I totally agree. It's a messy space. Another space that they're doing it in is like methane capture in like landfills. So landfills, they just like have a bunch of garbage, right? And so they're emitting a bunch of like this gas. And now there's like this carbon capture technology. A lot of this carbon capture technology hasn't been fully vetted. We don't know. There's no static framework for understanding and for like allowing like, okay, why did we give this many carbon offsets to this one installation? Go ahead.
Also, what are they doing with the methane that they capture?
I don't know.
Do they like just
That's a great question. I really don't know.
Is it just fuel again? I don't.
I really don't know. I would totally tell you if I knew.
Yeah, because it seems like, I mean, what do we do with methane? It's used as some sort of, we
Fuel,
burn it.
right? Yeah. Yeah.
So, like, I mean, I can't imagine that they're going to bury a bunch of methane in, like, pressurized tanks underground. Not only is that dangerous, but they have other uses for it. So,
Sure.
like, where's, yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. I couldn't tell you. I would totally give, like, again, like this is like I think this is like a huge knowledge gap for me personally is like carbon offsets. Like I have a lot more of an understanding of why it's wishy-washy with like forestation because I think forestation is like I don't know, you just hear about it more, right? Like there's a lot of technologies that are out there that are given carbon offsets. I think clean cook stoves is like another one of them, right? I just don't know enough about it. Go ahead.
You were talking a lot about like how the wishy-washy aspect of it, of all the of like carbon offsets and like the deforestation aspect. I guess like how do you think like scaling of these kind of different programs, like how is technology catching up to it? Because I imagine like every time, let's say like a company takes on a particular goal, like you need a whole set of like humans to like monitor, like they're actually doing what they're like saying they're doing. Like is technology catching up to that such that the monitoring is being made easier, or like is it still like you need a lot of like manpower and that's where like it's difficult to monitor?
I think that's a really good question. I will say, so in a similar way to how like LEED certification for a building, for example, right? That's an industry to get LEED certification, right? That's an existing framework. There's scope guidance for that. We have parameters for how you get LEED, silver, gold, platinum, whatever it may be. Carbon offsets is getting there. There are certifications in the same way that there are like for RECs, for renewable energy certificates, there's green E certification. There are different levels of certification for RECs. That does exist for carbon offsets, and there are some markets. Yes, okay. So there are some markets that are like more reputable than others. It's still highly questioned. So I think that the technology is catching up. It's much slower than the rest of the industry. And oftentimes, the thing that carbon offsets are usually used for is, and I didn't delineate this, I don't have this anywhere in my, and I really realized that I now probably should have talked about it, but do you guys know, or like, do you know like the terms like scope 1, scope 2, scope 3 emissions? Okay, so just quickly, like scope 1 emissions are like direct emissions, like emissions that come directly from your site. Scope 2 emissions are like the emissions that typically I deal with because they're the emissions that are generated when you generate electricity. So by buying electricity, getting that electricity generated some emissions, right? So that's what scope 2 is. So like anytime you're buying electricity, those are scope 2 emissions. But scope 1 is just like the stuff that you directly did on your site. So energy efficiency and carbon offsets, those are like, to the best of my knowledge, the only two things that really like offset those. So energy efficiency, you're reducing your energy usage. You're reducing the amount of heat, you're reducing your usage. That's scope 1, right? So that's just overall scope 1. Carbon offsets in the same way that you can apply them to scope 1 or scope 2, again, because they're a little bit wishy-washy, but mainly just because you're removing that amount of carbon. Suppose you can claim with an offset that you're removing that amount of carbon from the atmosphere. That can also be administered to scope 1. Scope 3, it's a lot less recorded, but if you think about it, like think of like a manufacturing company, they make a product and then they send it out the door and then someone buys it and then they throw it away. That's scope 3 emissions, is the downstream effects, the downstream emissions. Oftentimes there's no requirement for companies to quantify those. So, you know, you have X amount of employees, they all use cars, they all drive to work. You don't really have to quantify those because you're not the one commuting, right? It's technically not on company time. I'm driving to work, you know. Those are scope 3 emissions. So carbon offsets are specifically useful for the rest of scope 1 emissions. So sometimes what companies do is they have, usually what they're trying to do is they're trying to lower their scope 2, which is a lot of like their energy purchasing, their electricity purchasing, their natural gas purchasing. So that's where carbon offsets really come in, is for scope 1, because there's not a ton you can do. Like, you know, we all use energy. We just do. That's just fact, right? We all just go to work and you have to use energy to function as a society, as a company, whatever. I honestly don't even remember where the question initially started, but my point is just that carbon offsets are there for like offsetting that scope 1 emissions. Go ahead.
I think I've quantified kind of what or I've got a better way of what I mean by like not carbon offsets not being like my
Bless you.
complaint about them not really doing anything even if the forest is doing. So I'm in a class called Global Biogeochemical Cycles right now,
Cool.
and we do the carbon cycle. The carbon cycle has a fast section and a slow section, and basically what we're doing is right now is we basically doubled the flow from the slow section to the fast section.
Mm-hmm.
So what we ultimately need to do is somehow get things back to the slow section, right?
Yeah.
But and there's actually questions about whether having a richer CO2 atmosphere will even cause more plant growth for a variety of reasons. But right, the land biota is still part of the fast section of the carbon cycle. So you basically have to, for it to really get, because the plants are constantly respiring, and when the plants die, the animals basically break down the carbon, goes back to the atmosphere. So do people like think about like that sort of thing? Like, because it's only a fraction of that sort of carbon fixing power of a plant that would actually, get all the way to becoming back to the slow cycle in terms of sedimentary rocks and carbonate and whatnot.
So, this is maybe going to be a disappointing answer. No. People don't think about that. And I will say, the reason is, if you think about why would someone, not just someone, like gigantic companies, multi-million, whatever, billion-dollar companies, like numbers that I can't even fathom, why are they hiring us? They're hiring us because they want to get a job done. They want to hit a number. And that's like a base level. Again, that's not even like, there are altruistic reasons. There are like like I said, there's all these like different reasons why companies are doing this. They're looking to us to consult them. They are definitely not looking at the inner mechanisms of a lot of these things. They're looking to either diversify their portfolio, or they do want to have like some additionality, but to them that means investing in a solar farm. Like, they maybe exist in Ohio. They just want to invest in a solar farm in Ohio. They don't really internalize what a lot of that means, right? So that's why they hire us. And I also guarantee that if I were to sit there and try and explain that, it would not, the client meeting wouldn't go well. So what was your question? Sorry, go ahead.
I was just saying, yeah, I said like ecologically, like preserving the forest is in itself a really great goal, but it's one of those examples of I think this is sometimes not very well explained, but like there's often a difference between energy goals and atmospheric goals and
Sure.
ecological goals, and I feel like that's like this preserving forests is, well, it's definitely it's definitely an energy goal in some ways. It's also it's even more so an ecological goal.
Yeah.
And it's being used as a atmospheric or
Almost as like a proxy,
yeah,
right, to try and get you to your energy goals. Yeah. Yes, I definitely agree. And I also just think it's so complicated. Like, ecology is complicated. That's why, monetizing carbon offsets, it's actually like kind of a lucrative business right now, because someone needs to figure it out. Someone needs to develop something that's consistent. And I agree. Sometimes the two are conflated, that like ecological goals, atmospheric goals versus just energy or ESG or sustainability goals. They can get conflated all the time. So yeah.
Yeah, and this is just a rough estimate from my midterm, but we had a midterm problem that was like, what would happen if all the biomass on Earth were to combust right now in terms of carbon and oxygen in the atmosphere?
Oh God, that's a fun problem.
And we've basically burned, I think based on my calculations, and I still haven't gotten the grade on this, so hopefully this is right, but
really depressing.
It's basically double that. Anyways, sorry, this is something I mentioned.
No, totally fine. I totally get it. I am not a carbon offsets expert. I really wish I was. But I will say it's like, honestly, I wish it were a bigger portion of my job. The reason it's not is because you just can't confirm it to the level that we'd like, right? So I find it super fascinating. It's a rapidly developing industry. So if you figure out how to quantify it and have like a perfect framework for it, girl, you'd be a millionaire. So work on it. That would be awesome for me and for everyone else in the industry. Cool. Any other questions? Okay. I think the last thing is just like VPPAs, virtual power purchase agreements, kind of similar to RECs, but again, these are specifically to like solar and wind farms. I use this explanation like a lot. Basically what people do is they pay like a flat amount per month, right? You're paying a flat amount of like per megawatt hour or whatever, but you're just paying a flat amount of money, and then based on how much that farm is generating, then you get a credit back. Sometimes you make money, sometimes you don't. When you're investing in a solar farm and it's like midnight, you're not making any money, you're just paying them a flat amount. And then the last one, also I think pretty easy to conceptualize, it's just like an on-site solar installation. You're just installing something on your property. So the point is this is a lot. This is a lot of things. They're very complicated. They change per site, per state, whatever. They change in terms of availability. They change all the time. The market is changing on like an hourly basis for all of these things. So it's complicated. Figuring out how to help these companies decarbonize and how to make sustainability and ESG, meet their sustainability and ESG goals is complicated. So that's the main goal that I wanted to get to there. And obviously like carbon offsets, I wish I knew more because it's a really complicated industry and it needs to be quantified in a better way, in a more consistent way.
Yes.
So
Great, thank you.
I will just like wrap this up, but also totally open to like a million questions, career questions, industry questions, whatever you guys like. If you guys are interested in a career in energy, I think these things are really important. I mean, again, you guys are at the University of Chicago. You're being taught a lot of like qualitative and quantitative skills, like how to quantify things, how to qualitatively write about things and internalize ideas and thoughts. Critical thinking is so huge. Like this industry, like people aren't coming to us because I can put an Excel sheet together and say, here's the net present value. That's like the first 25, 33% of my job. The rest is me telling you, what do you do with that information? How do you mesh all these different aspects to create a strategy? How do you do that? And honestly, I'm still working it out for myself, you know, trying to figure out all the ins and outs of the industry to like get to that point. It just requires more thought than just numbers on a page. This also, you guys are familiar with statistical and economic valuation, not evaluation, but valuation, just specifically being able to go through things and look at what they're worth now, what they'll be worth later, all that kind of stuff. But again, Chicago, you guys are familiar with that. Not afraid of a challenge. It's a really complicated and challenging industry. I will not lie. I definitely, like, guys, I'm like 8 years into like my career at this point. I'm only like a year into the energy career aspect of my career. It's really challenging. It's really challenging because you're dealing with a bunch of different clients. Some clients maybe have like a high degree of knowledge about these industries. Some don't know what they're talking about, and that's why they hire you. Some have really like niche wants and desires that just don't make economic sense. You know, there's so many pushes and pulls, and that's just from the client side, let alone like the team side. Like I work with a team, like my specific team is like 4 people, and then we collaborate with 4 other teams of like 5 more people. So like you're just dealing with so much stuff. It's awesome. It's challenging. It's exciting. It's awesome. Let me just get to the end of the slide. Comfortable with constantly changing industry. This changes all the time. The energy industry is changing all the time. Like from day to day, policies are changing. Whether it be policy or literally just be the market itself, it's changing all the time. which is, I find that so exciting. Some people are like, oh, it's overwhelming, I hate it. And that's fair. That's like totally a fair response, right? Like, but for me, I love it. I think it's just so exciting. And then last, like passion, right? Like, so decarbonization is only one of the things that I do. It's probably the largest part of what I do, but I'm just so excited about it. I feel like, I'm working for like really huge companies. I'm consulting on, okay, like how do you achieve these goals? And at the end of the day, like I may just, okay, I just punch numbers into an Excel spreadsheet. I get to the end of my day, oh my God, that was exhausting. There's so many client asks, blah, blah, blah. At the end of the day, I really am like helping these clients and people like figure out how to decarbonize and do technically the right thing at the end of the day. It may take a lot of evaluation and a lot of steps and a lot of talking and a lot of like strategy determination to get there, but I get to be part of that. So I love it. I was, my background was in environmental studies before, and then I chose like public policy because I was like, I'm really interested in policy and this was like the perfect crossroads of both those things. So I'm really passionate about it, but I also can totally understand if like energy's not your gig, like the environmental sphere has so many other things you could do. So many other things. Are you kidding? Like conservation, like, biology, species, endangered species, whatever, like plastics. I mean, there's a million things in the environmental sphere, and maybe just like energy isn't your jam. And I get that. So I do really think, at the end of the day, I have a lot of passion for what I do. And it keeps it really exciting for me. And that's why I love it. So that's it. I'm totally happy to talk through anything, everything. You can always reach out to me, connect with me on LinkedIn. Love that. I like totally love talking to people about this stuff. I had to go through the same thing. When I first graduated with my undergrad and when I graduated with like public policy degree, I like talked to a million people, cold talk to people, and people are just super giving with their time. So I'm super happy to pay that forward. Please feel free to contact me anytime you like. And I'll take more questions. But thanks. Great.
Could you talk a little bit about your transition from the work you were doing before into the energy sphere and how you sort of made that transition?
Yes, totally. I will say, I will come clean. I did not decide to go into energy until maybe like 4 months before I graduated with my master's. So this wasn't even like, a long thought out plan. So before, what I was doing was I was an environmental consultant, facilitating real estate transactions. So basically what that meant was that banks were trying to get loans acquired and they wanted to acquire these properties, but you need to get, an environmental assessment. So I was doing that. And it started to just, for me personally, it started to just get a little bit rote. Like I wasn't learning that much more. I just felt a bit stagnant, and I'm like the kind of person, and for some people, they totally love to just be confident in what they're doing, to be like totally knowledgeable and just be comfortable. And I was in a spot where that would be really great for someone. And the company was great and the people were great. And I was just bored. I was bored out of my mind. So honestly, because I didn't know what to do and because I didn't know what the next steps were, I decided to go back to school, which I feel like is in of itself kind of a tough choice to make. I'm really glad that I didn't jump into a graduate program right after graduating with my undergrad, because I think I would have probably made the wrong choice because I didn't quite know what I was good at, what I liked. And I really decided, okay, policy is really interesting. Environmental policy I find fascinating. So jumped into Harris. Was at Harris for a couple years, and then by the end I was like, okay, I really need to figure out my life, as I feel like a lot of people feel the pressure to do. And I don't want to say I fell into it. I think it was just one of those things where it's like you just look at the industries around you, you look at the people that are operating in those industries, you look at people you like look up to, and energy just seemed like such a cool, impactful space. It took some time. It took me like talking to a bunch of my friends, right? Like you talk to a bunch of the people around you, talking to professors, talking to even seriously like UChicago. This is like a scary thing that I did, but reaching out to on LinkedIn to UChicago grads, like people who have an MPP, people who have my same degree, who went to my same school with whatever, and I'm like, oh, your job sounds cool. Tell me about it. Worst thing that happens is they say no or they don't respond, right? Like they don't know who you are, like, right? And I got so many responses, so many helpful, consistent responses of people just wanting to talk to me and just share. And I mean, that was to me like the most helpful thing, was just hearing from people's experiences and then kind of deciding what my goals, my personal career goals were, both short term and long term. And also, you know, where I wanted to live, right? Like I live in Chicago. I'm happy to stay in Chicago. There's a lot of opportunities in energy in Chicago. Maybe you actually want to be in policy, then maybe Washington, D.C. is the place for you, right? So just knowing like consistencies about yourself and what I wanted. It took a while, it took a lot of conversations. I seriously, like, I cannot suggest enough, just reach out to people. Cold reach out to people on LinkedIn and just say, hey, I saw you went to Chicago too, or I saw you're doing this and that's like the coolest thing ever. Can you please, like, would you take some time to like tell me about your favorite aspects of your job? Or can you take like 15 minutes to have a chat? Like 9 times out of 10, you're gonna get a yes. You're gonna get people super excited to talk to you about it. And that was really helpful for me. It was really formative for me. Go ahead.
So you mentioned that you work with a lot of international companies that have, like, that not only work in the US but Asia, Latin America. So as an energy consultant, do you like get to travel a lot too? Doing that?
Oh God, I wish. No, I don't. I do all my research from the good old USFA. But you absolutely can find yourself in positions where you do. So someone who works on a different team, but like works collaboratively with my team, he is an engineer and he works on the energy efficiency side. So a lot of that requires a site visit. And, you know, like, you know, you can totally like finesse your way into like going to some really cool locations. If engineering and energy efficiency is not your gig, you can also work on like more of a client facing side. So I specifically work on the market analytics side. So I kind of describe my team as like the knowledge powerhouse, right? Like we're the ones running all the models. We're the ones like people turn to us for like basic answers or questions, whatever. Like we're there to like solve all that and put numbers behind it and put robust research behind it. But if you want to be more on a client facing side, like you want to like go out of your way to like meet with people and like figure out like client needs and all that stuff, there's also people on the client facing side who travel. So if you're really interested in doing that, you could totally find things that work for you in the energy industry. Again, like this just goes back to like my last answer. Just find what you're passionate about, find what drives you, and you can totally find things that fit that. I literally had interviews before this job for one that was more of a traveling job. Traveling wasn't as much for me. I'm happy to travel maybe like once or twice a year. That's me personally, but some people just want to travel like all the time. So find what you like. You don't be afraid to like figure that out and just be like, all right, this is like a number one thing that I want. Like sometimes people are really driven by salary, right? And that's totally fair. Like, all right, I want X amount of money, period. Okay, I want to travel, period. I want that, whatever. Like figure that out and like create like a tier for yourself and you can totally make it work. I will say, I don't think you should have a list of like, these are 10 must-haves. I would say you should have like a tiered list of like, all right, this is a must-have, and then, okay, this I could do without, this is what I can be flexible on, because you can also always negotiate for those things as you're like figuring out your parameters. Yeah.
So I wasn't sure, wasn't expecting that there was going to be like, this was going to be a company that had a lot of like applied STEM roles or positions in it. But you said there's like an engineering position. So
Mm-hmm.
what does that side of things look like with your company?
So for AEP Energy, again, I will say it's being sold off. So I wouldn't look at AEP Energy much longer. But sure. But I would definitely say like, so I have a friend, actually a very close friend, who did not go to UChicago, but she got a PhD in biology. And she looks into, like, she specifically learned about things in plant biology, and she specifically looked at things in biotech. I think STEM is a great place for people with an environmental passion. I mean, it depends. So if you want to be an engineer, engineers have a lot to be done in like the building space and like urban planning space. Engineers also have like, I mean, they can do honestly so much between like mechanical, electrical, all that kind of stuff. I myself am not an engineer. I know a lot of people who are. But at the same time, people who are interested in being like scientists, maybe you're not interested in doing research, maybe you're interested in doing applied roles. I think just seriously, just look into the energy industry. And when I say like energy industry, like broadly, I mean, there are firms that are like energy consulting firms. There are like really huge firms like Deloitte and like Guidehouse that are just overall like huge consultants that do anything and everything under the sun. Maybe you're not interested in that, right? Like that's like too big for you. There are so many energy efficiency companies, small ones specifically in Chicago, and they do a lot of like more of like building inspections and things like that, like, but specifically for facilitating environmental renovation, any of those kind of things. I will say, when I was searching for a job, which was really recently, which is literally less than a year ago, the number of different firms that I applied to, like different types of firms, I mean, it was probably about 4 or 5 different categories of things. All of them had like energy in the name, but they were different roles, either project management or, but all of them required like a level of expertise that I could provide. And I'm not saying expertise is in like you worked in the industry before, but just that you can say, okay, here are where my skills lie, and here is what I know I'm good at, and like what you're interested in doing and what you're interested in learning more about. I would also say and strongly encourage, whenever you're looking for a job, whenever that happens, oh my God, it's like the worst thing, but it's like you'll do it and it'll be great. Whenever that happens, I strongly encourage you to do consistent research into what's happening now in the industry, even if some of like it goes over your head. Right. So what I did personally, I read this blog called like newsletter blog called Utility Dive. And I'm sure a lot of people are familiar with it, right? Like everyone's familiar with it. Everyone's heard of it. I had never heard of it. And everyone's like, you should read this. And honestly, a lot of the articles kind of went over my head. I didn't really know what they were talking about a lot of the time. But just immersing yourself into the now of news, like it gets you a lot of like speaking points, and it gets you a lot of places. I literally would look up companies that were mentioned in articles and applied to them. That was like a weird thing that I did, but it was super helpful, and it ended up getting me where I'm at. Literally AP Energy was mentioned in an article, and I was like, oh, whatever, that sounds good, right? It's energy's in the title, that'll be great, and it worked out. So you just never know. You never know what'll stick. So that's my suggestion, is just like totally expose yourself to what's going on now and immerse yourself in it, and don't be afraid to reach out to people who work at those companies. Did you have another question?
I wanted to ask like what resources you use to stay updated with press.
Yeah, Utility Dive. Yeah, definitely Utility Dive. But I will also say, no, I'm going to stick with Utility Dive because I feel like the other resources I work are like, we have like stuff through work that like I can like use, but I don't know if like they require accounts or not. But yeah, definitely Utility Dive. I would stay up to date with that. I would also strongly suggest, like, anytime something big is passed, even still with the Inflation Reduction Act, I still consistently search the IRA like weekly, because things are changing weekly, and states are like kind of defining things. So yeah. Also, if you're ever wondering about something, totally feel free to reach out to me. I'm like happy to send sources about things. I will say, even though academic research is super, super important into pushing stuff, it's usually about 10 years ahead of where the rest of the industry is at. Let me just be clear. Usually, like, people, like, the things that support most of what I'm doing, like in terms of like academic articles and scholarly articles, is like, it's like 10 years in the past, because they were like, they're usually ahead of the curve, right? They're ahead of where the markets are at. That's kind of what I found. That's not always consistently true. But I I do love like reading like academic articles for like a little bit of like a nostalgia thing for me because it's like, oh, I'm back in school, but I don't often get to use them in my line of work. Usually it's like more like public policy lawyer, a lot of lawyer speak, a lot of lawyer jargon. So, any other questions? Yeah, of course. This is fun for me. So again, I put this up here not just as like a courtesy. Please reach out to me if you have questions or if you want to connect or whatever. Totally happy to talk about this more. So thanks, guys.